Get comfortable. Close your eyes. Tonight, we are not traveling to the future. We are going back 5,000 years back to a place where along the banks of a great river, one of the most mysterious civilizations in human history slowly came to life. It is warm there. It smells of sand and centuries. And the stories there have never really ended.
Chapter 1: The Birth of a Civilization. It all began with a river. Not with a war, not with a great king, not with a divine revelation, but with a river. The Nile. This thin blue thread cutting through one of the harshest deserts on Earth. On one side, endless sand, scorching heat, death. On the other side, green fields, cool water, life. Everything that ancient Egypt ever was grew from that narrow strip of green along the riverbank. The Nile was not simply a river to the ancient Egyptians. It was a god, a living, breathing deity that gave and took away. Every year, with extraordinary regularity, the Nile flooded its banks. It covered the surrounding land with a thick layer of dark, fertile silt. And when the waters receded, the earth was ready for planting. This cycle was so reliable, so precise, that the Egyptians built their entire calendar around it. 3 seasons: the flood, the planting, the harvest. Year after year, for thousands of years. The earliest settlements along the Nile appeared around 10,000 years ago. Small communities of farmers and fishermen who quickly learned that this river rewarded those who respected it. Over centuries, these communities grew. They began trading with one another. Conflicts arose. Leaders emerged. And gradually, very gradually, 2 distinct kingdoms took shape. Upper Egypt in the south, where the river runs narrow and fast through rocky terrain. Lower Egypt in the north, where the Nile fans out into a wide green delta before meeting the sea.
For a long time, these 2 kingdoms existed separately. They had different crowns, different gods, different traditions. Upper Egypt wore the white crown. Lower Egypt wore the red crown. And then, around 3,100 years before Christ, something happened that would change the course of history. A king from the south unified both kingdoms under a single rule. His name, according to most historians, was Narmer, though some call him Menes. The debate over his true identity continues to this day. But what is certain, on the day he placed both crowns upon his head, ancient Egypt was born. From that moment, the history of Egypt is divided into periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, each lasting hundreds of years, each producing its own pharaohs, its own monuments, its own glory. The word pharaoh itself did not originally mean king. It meant great house, referring to the royal palace. Only later did it come to mean the ruler himself. And what rulers they were. Not simply kings, gods walking among men. At least, that is what they wanted everyone to believe. And for 3,000 years, it worked. Chapter 2: Gods and Myths. The ancient Egyptians did not simply believe in gods. They lived inside their mythology. Every sunrise was the god Ra sailing his golden boat across the sky. Every sunset was Ra descending into the underworld to battle the serpent of chaos through the night. Every flood of the Nile was the tears of the goddess Isis, weeping for her lost husband. The world was not a mechanical place of cause and effect. It was a living story, told and retold by the gods themselves.
The Egyptian pantheon was enormous. Over 2,000 gods and goddesses have been identified by historians. Some were worshipped across the entire country. Others belonged to a single city, a single village, a single family. But at the heart of Egyptian mythology, there was one story that explained everything. The story of Osiris. Osiris was the god of life, death, and resurrection. He was the first king of Egypt, a wise and beloved ruler who taught humanity the arts of civilization, agriculture, law, writing. But his brother Set was consumed by jealousy. Set, the god of chaos, storms, and the desert, murdered Osiris. He sealed him in a golden coffin and threw it into the Nile. But death was not the end of Osiris. His wife Isis, goddess of magic and healing, searched the world for his body. She found him. She used her magic to bring him back to life long enough to conceive their son Horus. And then Osiris.
Horus, the falcon-headed god, grew up to avenge his father. He fought Set in an epic battle that shook the heavens. He lost an eye in the struggle, the famous Eye of Horus, which became one of the most powerful symbols in Egyptian culture. A symbol of protection, healing, and royal power. When Horus finally defeated Set, he became king of the living, and every pharaoh of Egypt was considered the living embodiment of Horus on earth. Then there was Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the dead. He was the guardian of the scales. In Egyptian belief, when a person died, their heart was weighed against a feather. The feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul passed into paradise, into a beautiful realm called the Field of Reeds, where the sun always shone and the Nile always flooded at the right time. But if the heart was heavy with sin, it was devoured by Ammit, a terrifying creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, and the soul ceased to exist entirely.
This is why the Egyptians were so obsessed with death. Not because they feared it, but because they wanted to be ready for it. The Book of the Dead was not a book of mourning. It was a guidebook, a manual for navigating the afterlife, filled with spells, prayers, and instructions for passing every test the underworld might throw at you. mummies were placed in tombs alongside the dead, personalized, written specifically for each individual. Because in Egypt, death was not the end of the story. It was simply the next chapter.
Chapter 3: The Pharaohs. To be a pharaoh in ancient Egypt was to be everything: king, high priest, living god, military commander, judge, builder. The pharaoh stood at the center of the universe, the bridge between the world of humans and the world of gods. If the pharaoh was strong and just, the Nile would flood on time, the harvests would be good, the enemies would stay away. If the pharaoh was weak, chaos would follow. This was not metaphor. This was Egyptian theology.
Over 3,000 years of history, Egypt had many pharaohs, some forgotten, some immortal. Let us walk among the greatest of them. Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, ruled during the Old Kingdom, around 2,500 years before Christ. He is the pharaoh who built the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest stone structure ever built by human hands. We know surprisingly little about Khufu himself. Only one small statue of him has ever been found, just 8 centimeters tall. The man who ordered the construction of one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world survives in a figurine you could hold in your palm. Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great, is perhaps the most famous pharaoh who ever lived. He ruled for 66 years in the 13th century before Christ. He fought the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh, one of the earliest recorded battles in history. The battle ended in a stalemate, but Ramesses declared it a glorious victory. And
Hatshepsut, one of the few female pharaohs in Egyptian history. She ruled for over 20 years in the 15th century before Christ. She was enormously successful, expanding trade routes, building magnificent temples, presiding over a period of great prosperity. And yet, after her death, someone systematically erased her from history. Her images were chiseled from temple walls. Her statues were smashed and buried. Her name was removed from official records. For centuries, she was forgotten. It was not until the 19th century that archaeologists pieced together her story and restored her to her rightful place in history.
And then there is Tutankhamun, the boy king. He became pharaoh at around 8 or 9 years of age and died before he was 20. By Egyptian standards, he was an insignificant ruler, too young to accomplish much, his reign too short to leave a great legacy. And yet today, he is perhaps the most famous pharaoh of all. Because in 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, almost completely intact, untouched for over 3,000 years. The treasures inside were beyond imagination. Golden masks, jeweled thrones, alabaster jars, wooden chariots, over 5,000 individual objects, buried with a boy who barely had time to live. And finally, Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was not Egyptian by blood. She was Macedonian Greek, a descendant of one of Alexander the Great's generals. But she was the first ruler of her dynasty to actually bother learning the Egyptian language. She spoke 9 languages in total. She was razor sharp politically.
Chapter 4: The Pyramids. There are structures on this earth that make you stop, that make you question everything you thought you knew about the ancient world.
It is made of approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, each block weighing on average 2.5 tons. Some blocks in the interior weigh up to 80 tons. The precision of its construction is almost impossible to explain, even today. The base of the pyramid is level to within just 2.1 centimeters across its entire 430-meter length. The 4 sides are aligned with the cardinal points of the compass, with an accuracy of less than 1/10 of a degree. With modern GPS and laser technology, this would be impressive. 4,500 years ago, it is extraordinary. How did they build it? This question has fascinated and frustrated historians for centuries. The popular image, thousands of slaves whipped under the desert sun, is almost certainly wrong. Archaeological evidence suggests the pyramids were built by paid workers,
Skilled craftsmen, engineers, laborers, who were fed well, housed in purpose-built villages, given medical care, and buried with honor when they died on the job. We have found their graffiti on the stones. Work gangs gave themselves names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. They had a sense of humor. They were proud of their work. The most widely accepted theory today is that the blocks were transported on wooden sledges, pulled over wet sand, which reduced friction dramatically. Experiments have shown this works remarkably well. Ramps of various designs were likely used to raise the blocks into position, but the exact method remains debated. No ancient document clearly explains the construction process from start to finish, and that silence is what keeps the mystery alive. Inside the Great Pyramid are 3 known chambers.
the subterranean chamber cut into the bedrock below, the so-called Queen's Chamber in the middle, and the King's Chamber at the heart of the pyramid, where Khufu's sarcophagus was found. Empty. His mummy has never been found. No treasure was inside when explorers first entered. Either it was looted in antiquity, or, and this is the theory some researchers quietly entertain, the King's Chamber was never the real burial chamber at all. In recent years, scanning technology has revealed possible hidden voids inside the pyramid. Spaces that have never been opened. Rooms that no human has entered in 4,000 years. What is inside them? Nobody knows yet. The Sphinx stands nearby, a colossal statue with the body of a lion and the face of a human. It is carved directly from the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. It is about 73 meters long and 20 meters tall. Who does its face represent?
Most Egyptologists believe it depicts Pharaoh Khafre. But not everyone agrees. Some researchers point to weathering patterns on the Sphinx's body, suggesting it may be far older than the pyramids themselves. perhaps carved during a period of heavy rainfall in Egypt, 10,000 or more years ago. This theory is deeply controversial. Most mainstream scholars reject it, but it refuses to go away because the weathering is real, and the questions it raises have no comfortable answers. The pyramids were not built in isolation. They were the centerpiece of vast funerary complexes. Temples, causeways, smaller pyramids for queens, boat pits containing full-sized wooden vessels. One such boat, found dismantled in a pit beside the Great Pyramid, was reassembled and is over 43 meters long. It was built to carry the pharaoh into the afterlife. Every detail was considered, every stone placed with purpose. These were not monuments to ego. They were machines for achieving eternal life. Engines of resurrection built in stone, designed to last forever. And in a way, they have.
Chapter 5: Everyday Life. Between the pharaohs and the pyramids, between the gods and the golden thrones, there were people. Ordinary people. Farmers who woke before dawn to tend their fields. Bakers who shaped loaves of bread in the dark. Children who played games along the riverbank. Mothers who sang lullabies. Old men who sat in the shade and told stories. The ancient Egyptians were not distant and mysterious. They were remarkably human. Most Egyptians were farmers. Their lives revolved entirely around the Nile and its cycles. When the flood came, they could not work the fields, so many were conscripted to work on state building projects. This is partly how the pyramids were built, not by permanent slave labor, but by rotating teams of farmers with nothing else to do during flood season. They were fed, housed, and paid in goods: grain, beer, linen, oil. Beer, incidentally, was not a luxury in ancient Egypt. It was a staple food. Workers received daily rations of bread and beer as part of their wages. Even children drank a weak version of it. The water of the Nile was not always safe to drink. Beer was safer, and apparently quite enjoyable. Egyptian society was surprisingly egalitarian by ancient standards, at least compared to many other civilizations of the time. Women had significant legal rights. They could own property, they could initiate divorce, they could conduct business, sign contracts, appear in court. A wife was not simply the property of her husband. She was a legal person in her own right. This was genuinely unusual for the ancient world. Marriage in Egypt was a practical arrangement. No grand ceremony, no religious ritual required. A couple simply began living together, and they were considered married. Divorce was equally straightforward. You simply left. The Egyptians cared deeply about their appearance. Both men and women wore kohl, a dark pigment applied around the eyes. This was not purely decorative. Kohl reduced the glare of the desert sun and had mild antibacterial properties. They used perfumed oils to protect their skin from the heat. They wore wigs, elaborate, expensive wigs, as a sign of status and fashion. The wealthier you were, the more elaborate your wig. They had combs, mirrors, razors, tweezers. Archaeologists have found cosmetic palettes and makeup containers that would not look out of place in a modern bathroom. Egyptian medicine was remarkably advanced for its time. They understood that the heart was central to the body's function. They performed surgeries. They set broken bones with splints. They used honey as an antibacterial agent, something modern medicine has rediscovered only recently. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in the world, describes 48 cases of injury and disease.
With a clinical precision that reads surprisingly like a modern medical textbook. No spells, no prayers, just observation, diagnosis, and treatment. Alongside this rational medicine, magic and prayer played an equally important role. The two were not considered contradictory. They worked together. Children in ancient Egypt played with toys. Archaeologists have found wooden dolls with movable limbs, balls made of leather and papyrus, small carved animals that could be pulled along on strings. They played board games. The most popular was called Senet, a game something like backgammon. It was so beloved that it was placed in tombs so the dead could play it in the afterlife. Even in death, the Egyptians wanted their favorite games with them. Some things about human nature have not changed at all. Chapter 6: War and the Army. For much of its history, ancient Egypt was remarkably peaceful by the standards of the ancient world. Surrounded by desert on two sides and sea on the north, it was naturally protected from invasion. The Nile Valley was rich and productive. There was little need to conquer neighbors when your own land gave you everything you needed. But this peace was never absolute. And when Egypt went to war, it went to war with enormous force.
The Egyptian army, in its early form, was not a professional standing force. It was a conscript army. Farmers and laborers called up when needed and sent home when the campaign was over. But by the New Kingdom period, around 1500 years before Christ, Egypt had developed one of the most formidable military machines in the ancient world. Professional soldiers, elite chariot units, mercenary fighters from Nubia and Libya, a sophisticated system of forts and supply lines stretching across conquered territories. The chariot changed everything. Introduced to Egypt by the Hyksos, a people from the Levant who invaded and occupied northern Egypt for over a century, the chariot was initially used against the Egyptians. The Egyptians studied it, adopted it, and eventually mastered it. When they finally drove the Hyksos out, they pursued them with the very weapon the Hyksos had brought. The chariot became the centerpiece of Egyptian military power for centuries.
The Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BC is one of the most famous battles of the ancient world. Ramesses II led his army against the Hittite Empire in what is now Syria. The battle was brutal and confused. Ramesses himself was nearly surrounded and killed. According to Egyptian accounts, he personally charged the enemy in his chariot, calling on the god Amun to save him. And somehow, he survived. The battle ended with neither side achieving a decisive victory. But what came after was perhaps more significant than the battle itself. Egypt and the Hittites signed a peace treaty, one of the earliest known peace treaties in human history. A clay tablet version of it still exists, and a replica hangs on the wall of the United Nations headquarters in New York. Egypt also fought wars to the south, into the land of Nubia, rich in gold and other resources. Nubian soldiers were renowned for their skill with the bow, and many served in the Egyptian army as elite archers. The relationship between Egypt and Nubia was complex, sometimes colonial domination, sometimes mutual trade and cultural exchange. At one extraordinary point in history, Nubian kings actually conquered Egypt and ruled it as pharaohs. The 25th dynasty, the Nubian dynasty, ruled Egypt for nearly a century and were among the most devoted patrons of traditional Egyptian culture. They built more pyramids than any Egyptian dynasty before them. In what is now Sudan, there are more ancient pyramids than in Egypt itself. Most people do not know this.
Egyptian soldiers carried spears, axes, daggers, and bows, shields of wood and leather. By the New Kingdom period, bronze swords had become common. Armor was minimal. The heat made heavy armor impractical. Speed and aggression were preferred over heavy protection. Chariots carried two men, a driver and an archer, who could loose arrows at terrifying speed while moving. The psychological impact of a chariot charge on soldiers who had never seen one before must have been overwhelming. Victory in battle was celebrated with elaborate rituals. Defeated enemies were depicted on temple walls, bound, kneeling, humiliated. The pharaoh shone towering over them, arm raised to strike. These images were not simply propaganda. They were acts of magic. By depicting the enemy as defeated and powerless, the Egyptians believed they were making it so in reality. The image and the reality were not separate things. In Egyptian thought, to show something was to make it true.
Chapter 7: Secrets and Mysteries. Every civilization has its shadows, its unanswered questions, its locked doors that refuse to open no matter how hard historians push. But ancient Egypt has more of these than almost any other culture in human history. Perhaps because it lasted so long. Perhaps because so much was deliberately hidden. Or perhaps because the Egyptians understood something about mystery that we have forgotten. Let us begin with the most famous mystery of all, the curse of the pharaohs. In November 1922, Howard Carter's team broke through the sealed door of Tutankhamun's tomb. Within months, Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy Englishman who had funded the excavation, was dead. A mosquito bite on his cheek became infected. He died of blood poisoning in Cairo. At the exact moment of his death, according to his son, all the lights in Cairo went out simultaneously.
And back in England, his dog howled once and dropped dead. The newspapers went wild. They reported an inscription above the tomb's entrance: "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." There was no such inscription. Howard Carter himself lived for another 17 years. Many members of the excavation team lived long, healthy lives. But the story refused to die. Because stories like this never do. Modern science has offered rational explanations. Ancient tombs can harbor dangerous molds and bacteria, preserved for thousands of years in sealed environments. A person with a compromised immune system, like Lord Carnarvon, who had been in poor health for years, could theoretically be affected. This explanation satisfies some people. It does not satisfy everyone. And late at night, when the mind is quiet and the room is dark, it is hard not to wonder. Then there is the mystery of the lost labyrinth.
Ancient Greek historians, including Herodotus, described an enormous structure near Lake Maurus in the Fayum region, a building they called the Labyrinth. Herodotus claimed it contained 3,000 rooms, half above ground and half below. He said it surpassed even the pyramids in its complexity and magnificence. He walked through it himself and was overwhelmed. And yet today, it cannot be found. No structure matching this description has ever been excavated. Some researchers believe it lies beneath the sands of the Fayum, waiting. Others believe Herodotus exaggerated wildly, but his descriptions of Egypt have proven accurate in so many other cases that the mystery remains genuinely open. The mystery of Akhenaten is perhaps the strangest of all. Around 1350 years before Christ, a pharaoh came to power who attempted to overturn 3,000 years of Egyptian religion in a single lifetime. His name was Akhenaten.
He declared that there was only one God, the Aten, the disk of the sun. He closed the temples of all other gods. He moved the capital to an entirely new city built from scratch in the desert. He changed art, architecture, religion, politics, everything, in ways so radical that Egypt never fully recovered during his reign. His wife was the legendary Nefertiti, whose famous bust in the Berlin Museum is one of the most reproduced images from the ancient world. When Akhenaten died, his successors erased him from history with even greater thoroughness than Hatshepsut had been erased. His city was abandoned and demolished. His name was chiseled from every monument. He became known simply as the heretic king. And his son, the boy who inherited this shattered legacy, was Tutankhamun, who changed his own name from Tutankhaten, servant of the Aten, to Tutankhamun, servant of Amun, as Egypt desperately tried to return to its old gods.
And then there is the mystery that haunts every visitor to Giza: the alignment. The three pyramids of Giza, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, are arranged in a pattern that mirrors with extraordinary precision the three stars of Orion's belt. This theory, proposed by researcher Robert Bauval in the 1990s, remains controversial among mainstream Egyptologists. Many reject it entirely. But the visual similarity is striking. And the Egyptians were deeply obsessed with Orion, they associated it with Osiris, the god of resurrection. Did they deliberately align their greatest monuments with the stars of their most important god? Or is it coincidence?
Chapter 8: Hieroglyphs and Science. For 14 centuries, no living person could read ancient Egyptian. The hieroglyphs carved into every temple wall, every tomb, every papyrus were silent. Beautiful, intricate, mysterious, but completely impenetrable. The knowledge of how to read them had simply died out, as Egypt was absorbed first into the Greek world and then into the Roman. 14 centuries of silence. And then, in 1822, a young French scholar named Jean-François Champollion cracked the code. The key was the Rosetta Stone, a slab of dark granite discovered by Napoleon's soldiers in Egypt in 1799. It contained the same text written in 3 scripts: ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, a simpler Egyptian script called Demotic, and ancient Greek. Since scholars could read ancient Greek, the stone was the key that unlocked everything.
Champollion spent years comparing the scripts, identifying patterns, matching names, testing theories. When the breakthrough came, he reportedly ran through the streets of Paris, burst into his brother's office, shouted, "I have done it!" and promptly fainted from exhaustion. He was 31 years old. He had just given the ancient world its voice back. What the hieroglyphs revealed was astonishing. The ancient Egyptians were not simply builders of pyramids and worshippers of gods. They were scientists, mathematicians, astronomers, doctors. The Rhind mathematical papyrus, dating to around 1650 years before Christ, contains problems involving fractions, geometry, and algebra. The Egyptians knew how to calculate the area of a circle with remarkable accuracy. They understood the concept of pi, though they expressed it differently than we do. They could calculate the volume of a truncated pyramid, a mathematical problem that requires genuine sophistication. All of this more than 3,000 years before the modern era. Egyptian astronomy was equally impressive. They divided the sky into 36 sections, each one rising on the eastern horizon at 10-day intervals. They used these sections to tell time at night. They created a calendar of 365 days, one of the earliest solar calendars in history.
They tracked the movements of Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They predicted solar eclipses. The alignment of temples with astronomical events was not accidental. The Great Temple of Abu Simbel is oriented so precisely that twice a year, on the 21st of February and the 21st of October, the rising sun penetrates the entire length of the temple and illuminates the statues of the gods in the innermost sanctuary. All except one. The statue of Ptah, god of darkness, remains in shadow. Always. By design.
hieroglyphs themselves were not simply a writing system. They were sacred. The Egyptians called them Medu Neter, words of the gods. There were over 700 individual hieroglyphic signs. Some represented sounds. Some represented ideas. Some were determinatives. Silent signs added at the end of a word to clarify its meaning. Learning to read and write hieroglyphs required years of study.
Scribes were among the most respected members of Egyptian society, exempt from physical labor, entitled to sit while others stood, trusted with the records of the state. A scribe's palette and brushes were so important to his identity that they were often depicted in his tomb paintings. The tools of his trade accompanying him into eternity. The Egyptians also wrote on papyrus, sheets made from the pith of the papyrus plant that grew abundantly along the Nile. It was lightweight, durable, and relatively easy to produce. Egypt became the ancient world's primary producer of writing material. The word paper itself ultimately derives from papyrus. Every scroll in the Great Library of Alexandria, that legendary repository of ancient knowledge, was written on Egyptian papyrus. When the library burned, and how much was truly lost is itself one of history's great mysteries. But the material that carried all that knowledge was Egyptian.
Chapter 9: The Fall of Egypt. Nothing lasts forever. Not even Egypt. The civilization that built the pyramids, that gave the world writing and mathematics and medicine, that lasted 3,000 years while every other empire around it rose and crumbled, eventually it too began to fade. Not in a single dramatic moment, not in one great battle or one catastrophic flood, but slowly. The way all great things end. Gradually, then all at once. The cracks began appearing long before the end. The new kingdom, Egypt's golden age of empire and power, began to weaken after the death of Ramesses III in 1155 BC. A series of weak pharaohs followed. The priesthood of Amun grew so powerful that at one point the high priest effectively ruled Upper Egypt, while a separate pharaoh ruled the north. Egypt split, and a divided Egypt was a vulnerable Egypt.
The invasions came one after another. The Libyans first, establishing their own dynasties and ruling Egypt for centuries. Then the Nubians, the 25th dynasty that briefly reunified and reinvigorated the country. Then the Assyrians, one of the most brutal military powers the ancient world had ever seen. They sacked the sacred city of Thebes in 663 BC, a city that had stood for 2,000 years. The shock to Egyptian pride was immense. And yet, even then, Egypt recovered, drove out the Assyrians, produced one more renaissance under the 26th dynasty, a period of nostalgic cultural revival that deliberately looked back to the great days of the Old and Middle Kingdoms. Then came the Persians. In 525 BC, the Persian king Cambyses invaded Egypt, and defeated the last native pharaoh at the Battle of Pelusium. Egypt became a province of the Persian Empire. It regained independence briefly. There were periods of native rule interspersed with Persian occupation. But the days of Egyptian dominance were over. The world had grown larger. The powers pressing on Egypt's borders had grown stronger. And in 332 BC, Alexander the Great arrived. The Egyptians welcomed him. He was not another brutal conqueror in their eyes. He was a liberator from the hated Persians.
He visited the oracle of a moon in the desert oasis of Siwa, and the oracle declared him the son of a moon, a god in the Egyptian tradition. Alexander founded the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast, a city that would become one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. And then he left, continuing his conquest of the known world. He never returned to Egypt. He died in Babylon in 323 BC. He was 32 years old. His body was brought back to Alexandria and buried there, in a tomb that has never been found. After Alexander, his general Ptolemy took control of Egypt. The Ptolemaic dynasty ruled for nearly 3 centuries. Greek kings sitting on the throne of the pharaohs, worshipping Egyptian gods, building Egyptian temples, calling themselves pharaohs. The last of them was Cleopatra VII. And when she died in 30 BC, taking her own life rather than be paraded through Rome in chains, Egypt became a Roman province.
The ancient Egyptian religion survived for a few more centuries, practiced quietly in remote temples. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved in 394 AD on the walls of the Temple of Philae on an island in the Nile. After that, silence. 14 centuries of silence, until Champollion gave Egypt its voice back.
Chapter 10: The Legacy of Egypt. 3,000 years. Think about that for a moment. Ancient Egypt, as a unified civilization, lasted roughly 3,000 years. From the first pharaoh Narmer, around 3,100 BC, to the death of Cleopatra in 30 BC. For context, the time between Cleopatra and us today is shorter than the time between Cleopatra and the building of the Great Pyramid. To Cleopatra, the pyramids were already as ancient as she is to us. 3,000 years. And yet Egypt did not simply disappear. It seeped into everything that came after.
The influence of ancient Egypt on the modern world is so deep and so pervasive that we barely notice it anymore. Our calendar, 365 days, 12 months, is essentially the Egyptian solar calendar, adopted by Rome, inherited by us. The concept of the 7-day week has Egyptian roots. The tradition of the wedding ring, worn on the 4th finger of the left hand, comes from the Egyptian belief in the vena amoris, the vein of love, thought to run directly from that finger to the heart. Whether the vein exists is medically questionable, but the tradition has lasted 4,000 years. Some things outlive their origins. Egyptian mathematics and medicine filtered into Greek thought, and from Greece into Rome, and from Rome into the Islamic Golden Age, and from there into the European Renaissance. The chain of transmission is long and complex, but at its beginning, in many cases, is Egypt.
Egyptian mythology never truly died either. Isis and Osiris, Horus and Set. Their stories echo through centuries of religious tradition. Some scholars see parallels between the Osiris myth, the death and resurrection of a god, and later religious narratives. Whether those parallels are coincidence or transmission is a debate that continues in academic circles. But the stories themselves have a power that seems to transcend their origins. They speak to something fundamental in human nature: the fear of death, the hope of return, the love that refuses to accept loss. And the pyramids still stand. This above everything else. After 4,500 years, after every empire that conquered Egypt has itself turned to dust, after Rome and Byzantium and the Islamic caliphates and Napoleon's armies and British colonialism, the pyramids are still there. They will be there long after everything we have built has crumbled, long after our cities are forgotten, long after our own civilization has become a mystery for future archaeologists to puzzle over.
There is something deeply humbling about this, and something deeply comforting. We are not the first people to look up at the stars and wonder. We are not the first to fear death and dream of something beyond it. We are not the first to build beautiful things and hope they will last. The ancient Egyptians did all of this 5,000 years ago, with the same hearts, the same fears, the same hopes that we carry today. They believed that as long as a person's name was spoken, they were not truly dead. That to be remembered was a form of immortality. So tonight, lying in the darkness, you have kept that promise for thousands of people whose names have mostly been forgotten.
You have thought about them. You have listened to their stories. Khufu, Ramesses, Hatshepsut, Tutankhamun, Cleopatra, the farmers along the Nile, the scribes with their brushes, the workers who carved their names into stone and called themselves the drunkards of Menkaure. They lived. They loved. They built things meant to last forever. And in some small way, they did. Good night.